بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم وبارك على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن اهتدى بهديه واستنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. And welcome to the 60th episode of the Islamic Fiqh. We spoke in the last episode, which was before Eid al-Hajj, about felonies or offenses, and we talked about the deliberate killing and the semi-deliberate killing and the killing by mistake and the rulings pertaining that. And we stopped at the offenses or felonies causing physical injury. And I know that this is a little bit difficult to a lot of us, and it's also difficult for me to explain, because this requires someone who is on the job, frequently judging these issues, handling and dealing with them. And this happens to us maybe once in a lifetime, and maybe it does not happen at all. This is why when we study it, if we manage to understand it, in a couple of weeks of time, it will all go and disappear. And this is why it is important that one revises this knowledge as much as he can, so that it does not go entirely away, but he tries his level best to make the best of it and remembers the most of it. So what is meant by offenses causing physical injury? We're not talking about death. We're talking about something which is lesser than death. So any injury to the body that does not lead to death, this is something that is part of a felony, and we have to look into it. And Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Qur'an, as a form of punishment and compensation to the one who was wronged and transgressed against, Allah says, a life for a life. We spoke about that. And then He says, an eye for an eye, a nose for a nose, an ear for an ear, a tooth for a tooth, and a similar retribution for wounds. And the Prophet said, ﷺ, according to the books, according to Allah's book, a similar punishment is due. And this was in a case where a young female companion broke the tooth of another female companion after they had a fight. So these offenses, which do not lead to death, can be classified into three types. Either it is causing a wound, or it is causing a loss of a limb, or it is causing a loss of function of a bodily organ. And we will come to discuss these things. So first of all, the wounds. Wounds are of two kinds. Wounds that are to the face and the head, so this is a different category, and then the wounds to the rest of the body. As for the types of wounds, scholars categorize it into 10 types. 5 of them, there is no qisas, there is no getting even, an eye for an eye. No, we cannot implement this here. And what are these 5 types of wounds? A wound that scratches the skin. So I'm fighting with someone and I scratch his skin. A wound that causes little blood. With the scratch there is some blood, but it's not a lot of blood or a hemorrhage or a wound that cut a vein, for example. Thirdly, a wound that cuts the flesh slightly but does not reach the bones. Fourthly, wound that goes deep into the flesh but does not reach the membrane and that separates the flesh from the bone. And fifthly, a wound that reaches this membrane. These 5 types of wounds, scholars say that it is not possible to demand qisas or punishment equal to the transgression. And it's also, there is no prescribed indemnity or blood money for it. It is left to the judge to determine the compensation payable by the offender. So we have one category that such an offense can be only determined by the judge, whether the compensation is so and so in the person's wealth. He has to pay a fine, indemnity for the person who he had wronged, or any type of punishment he sees fit. The other 5 degrees are as follows. A wound that cuts the membrane and exposes the bone, and this requires 5% of the total indemnity payable in the case of killing. What is the indemnity or the diya in the case of killing? It is 100 camels. So 5% is 5 camels. And secondly, a wound that exposes and breaks the bone. So this does not only expose the bone, but it also breaks it. This requires 10%. Thirdly, a wound that dislocates a bone, whether it exposes it and breaks it or not. So maybe dislocation of a joint or an elbow or a shoulder. This requires 15% of indemnity. Fourthly, a wound that reaches the meninges and the membranes enclosing the brain. And fourthly and fifthly are the same compensation. Wound that cuts the meninges and reaches the brain. Now, this requires 1/3 of the blood money, which is 30 to 33 camels. Having said this, also a wound that goes deep into the body, whether in the abdominal area, chest, or back. This also, so if someone was stabbed with a knife in the abdominal area or in the chest or in the back with a deep knife, then this also requires 1/3 of the blood money. Now, having said that, there are conditions, and these conditions are as follows. In order to have qisas or the punishment, such wounds must be measurable correctly. So scholars say that we cannot have an actual punishment that is not transgressing and not coming short from the actual transgression. Meaning, someone stabs me. Now, old days, they could not measure exactly the wound's depth so that they can inflict a similar wound to the transgressor. But they said that if the wound reaches the bone, in this case, it is easily duplicated. But if it doesn't reach the bone, then there's a possibility of transgressing, going further than the actual wound, or going less. And therefore, there is no point of doing it. Likewise with the tooth. If you break someone's tooth, you can break the assailant's tooth, exactly the same place. But what about if it chips it? Nowadays, you can file it until it reaches the same place. And the second condition is it has to be equal in name and place. So if someone cuts another person's hand, if he cuts the right hand, we have to cut the hand of that person of the right side as well. We can't cut his left hand. A right hand in exchange for a right hand. A left foot in exchange for a left foot. It has to be exactly similar. If it was from the wrist, it has to be from the wrist. If it's from the elbow, it has to be from the elbow. But what about if it is in between? If someone cuts someone's hands in between? This is an issue of dispute. Some scholars say the victim is given the choice. He is to make a choice of amputating the man's hand from the wrist and taking the difference in cash money for the area that we cannot measure and cut in exchange for that. And this is something for the Muslim judge. Again, this is a very, very complicated topic that deals with biology, with human organs, and with wounds, and doctors may, surgeons to be exact, may be able to do this. So I cannot, if a person amputates or causes the loss of a pinky of another person, I cannot take the index finger of that person. It has to be exactly similar in the name and in the side. And this is what caused scholars to say that it is not permissible for a person to donate his body organs after death, which is a craze a lot of the people are falling into. So a person writes in his will, after I die, you can take my a cornea or eye, whatever. You can take my liver, you can take my kidneys, you can take my heart, you can take whatever you want of body parts, as if it is a junkyard full of cars and you just stripping it of spare parts. This is not permissible. This is not your body. You have been entrusted with this body. After you die, it must not be humiliated or treated in a way that is disrespectful to it. This is not your body to play with or to donate to anyone, and hence you are not allowed to do this. What about body organs donation while alive? If the organ reproduces and there's no harm on your life, this is permissible. As I was told that donating part of your liver is permissible because it grows back again. But to give an eye, which you cannot replace, nor it cannot grow back again, this is prohibited. To donate your blood is permissible because this regenerates. If you have 2 or 3 kidneys and you donate one and there's no risk on your life, inshallah, this is permissible, providing that there is a cause and a reason for that, and it's not financial, because selling any of these things is totally prohibited in Islam. Third condition is that both organs that we are comparing, so if someone amputates another person's organ, and his organ, the victim, had only 3 fingers working and 2 disabled, and the assailant's hand, the right hand, is all full and good and working, we cannot just simply come and say, okay, take this for that. No, because the victim's hand was not totally similar in health, etc., and therefore we do not make such a punishment and he has to pay for that in money. So I think this is about it. And in terms of why 5%, 15%, 10%, a third, this was taken from the companions, may Allah be pleased with them, and no one ever objected to it, which means that they agreed to it and accepted it. And this is in regards of wounds. Now, in regards of loss of limb, we spoke about that briefly, and we mentioned the conditions. And the scholars say it is similar to killing, murder, because it can be deliberate, loss of limb, it can be semi-deliberate, and it can be by mistake or an accident. And there are three conditions to be observed. The first one is that we mentioned that it has to be accurate without any form of aggravation of the injury. And nowadays, almost all types of injury can be measured by doctors. So a surgeon says, any type of wound, I can measure it, I can fix it, and I can easily duplicate it. So scholars, contemporary scholars, say against what the old scholars used to say, because the old scholars did not have this facility. So they totally prohibited it. But nowadays, as long as the surgeon can duplicate exactly the same form of aggression as a punishment, then this is permissible. And the three conditions were mentioned earlier. Okay, the third type, what do we mean by the third type? We said that offenses are of three types: either wounds, or loss of limb, or loss of function of a bodily organ. And the loss of function is not possible to measure and to duplicate. And this is why the scholars say that we cannot inflict a punishment similar to the crime. So if someone fights with another and causes him to lose sight maybe, or to have a reduction of sight, so he loses 60% of his sight, but he is not blinded, his eye is still in its place, in its socket. So this cannot be precisely duplicated and measured, because we can't tell exactly how much it is. So he must pay the victim the full indemnity, or half of it, or a quarter of it, depending on how we judge it. So for example, a person has one mind. He has the ability to hear, the ability to see, the ability to smell, the voice, the taste, the chewing, the ability to have intercourse. Some organs, we have two of them. So if something happens and he makes me lose function in one of my arms and I cannot move it, then this requires half of the blood money. If I lose both hands, I require the full indemnity, which is a full blood money, or the diya, etc. Now, when we come to the chapter or the section that deals with diya, we'll find that the diya is either 100 camels or 200 cows or 2,000 sheep, in some narrations 800 dinar, etc. It has a specific value that may vary from one another, but at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was almost similar. Yet the benchmark in blood money is the price of camels. So 100 camel is what is supposed to be given to the victim's family. Allah says, he who kills a believer by mistake must free a believing soul from bondage and pay an indemnity to his family unless they forego it by ways of charity. Okay, let's talk about killing. If a person kills deliberately, semi-deliberately, or by accident, is the indemnity, the blood money, the same? The answer yes and no. What do you mean? First of all, the person who kills deliberately is ordered to pay 100 camels. So, semi-deliberately and accidentally are also supposed to pay 100 camels. True, but they are different in a number of things. One, if a person kills deliberately, he alone has to pay the blood money. We do not, in Islam, we do not go around and ask people to help him. It has to be taken from his own wealth. While in the semi-deliberate and accidental diya or blood money, the one who pays it is his aqila. Aqila means the next of kin or his kinship, because this was a calamity, a catastrophe, something that was not anticipated. So they collaborate and produce the blood money. In the deliberate killing, it has to be now. So 100 camels, you have to pay them now. In the semi-deliberate and the accidental killing, it can be paid over the period of 3 years. So there is some leniency in it. In the deliberate killing, it has to be, in some narrations, divided into 4 types, 25 bint makhab, 25 bint laboon, 25 haqqa, 25 jad'a. 1 year, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old camels. In the semi-deliberate and the accidental, it can be 25 categories. 20 she camel bint makhab and 20 he camel ibn makhab. And then the other 3 categories, bint, laboon, haqqa and jad'a, 20, 20, 20. So more lenient. Other scholars said in the deliberate killing there has to be 20 or 40 pregnant she camels, and this is more expensive and more rare to find, to make it even more punishable for that murderer to taste his crime and to pay for it dearly from his own money and wealth, and to make it difficult for him. But this is according to the judge's judgment. As for the indemnity for the killing of the believer, 100 camels, we've gone through this. The indemnity should be paid in the form of camels, their value. We've gone through this by requiring 40 of these camels to be pregnant, and we've covered this. So in essence, this is almost what is there for us to learn about. As I said, this is not an easy topic. This is something that is difficult. I have summarized for you 200 to 300 pages of the books of fiqh. If you go through them, it is confusing because there are tens of names of the types of wounds, and it describes the impact, whether it's mudiha, it exposes the bone, whether it's in the face, it has a different name than if it's in the body, whether it reaches this much amount of the flesh, exposes it, and each type of wound, it has a name, and each name has a specific amount of camels as compensation, when it can be implemented as a punishment and inflicted upon the assailant, and when it, so many details that confuse you, but at the same time it shows you the magnificence of Islam. When you transgress against someone physically, you don't expect that to go unquestioned and without account. Islam had placed almost a detailed explanation and description of such injuries so that everything can be taken care of. It's not jail time that you spend for an attack against another human being. There is retribution, there is punishment, there is indemnity, there is pain to be inflicted upon you, to taste what you had made others go through. And this shows you the fairness and justice of Islam. We have questions pending from a very long time. So Diamond says, can I ask something? Video call married in Islam, is it halal? I think we've answered this like many times, but again, for the benefit of the doubt, video call marriage is permissible when there is no ambiguity of the identity of those participating. So I'm now with you guys in a video call, and I claim my name to be Abdullah, the son of Abdul Rahman, and I would like to get married to your daughter, uncle. The uncle doesn't know me. He doesn't know if my name is Abdullah or my name is Asim. He doesn't know where I come from, what I do. So if he doesn't know me and the witnesses do not know me, I don't know her father, whether he is her father truly or just an imposter coming to give his approval, because the girl is with me in the same city and we met over the internet, or we go to the same school, or we work together, and we would like to make our relationship halal. So I said, I'd like to marry you, and she's an easygoing woman. She said, okay, let's get married. I said, no, it has to be done properly. Where is your father? Well, my father is back home. Okay, let's get his approval. And she knows that her father does not approve of it. So she talks to an uncle, to the janitor of their building back home, and she tells him, I'll pay you $100 and you pretend to be my father. And I see him on a video chat or Skype or whatever, and he says, yes, my son, I give you my daughter in marriage. And I say, I accept her marriage. And there are two witnesses, whether on my side or on her side. This marriage is invalid. You have to identify and make sure of the identity of the participant. If this is possible, then the marriage is legit, inshallah. Yet we have to always give the warning that I get tens of cases every month of people complaining that they got this type of marriage and now the girl doesn't know where the boy is, and she wants to call this marriage off. She wants to divorce, but he is not divorcing, and she cannot file any type of khul' because the marriage was not registered. Well, it is your mistake. It is your father's mistake. Don't ever do something that is not documented, because you will suffer later on for breaking the law, for trusting people who do not deserve to be trusted, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Zuhra says, can a couple reconcile after a divorce? This is too generic, Zuhra. Allah says in the Qur'an, الطلاق مرتان فإمساك بمعروف أو تسريح بإحسان. Divorce is twice, where you have the ability to reconcile. The third divorce, if it takes place, they cannot ever reconcile, and they have to part their ways until she gets married, a real marriage for the sake of the second man, and she lives with that man and have intercourse like any spouse would do, and after a while they get divorced. Only then she can get married to her first husband. So if this is the first marriage, first divorce or second divorce, it is either they want to reconcile, or he wants to reconcile and revoke the divorce while she's in the iddah or after the iddah. If he divorced her once, she has 3 monthly cycles as iddah, generally speaking, if she's not pregnant. And he does not revoke the first divorce. He does not reconcile with her until the third menses is over and she sees her purity. They're total strangers. Now he wants to reconcile. Tough luck. You can't reconcile. You can propose to marry her again with a new mahar, with the approval of his and consent of her guardian, with 2 witnesses. And if she agrees and this is done, then you're man and wife again. But now you have 2 divorces left, because the third one is consumed, is gone. So you have 2 divorces. You do the same thing again, the same process. If it is within the iddah period, yeah, you can reconcile. You revoke the divorce. I divorced her now. A couple of weeks later, I said, listen, I revoke the divorce and we are man and wife again. That's good. Even if she doesn't want to, this is legit. She's your wife. 2 divorces down, 1 to go. Once the third divorce is uttered, that's it. Kiss the baby goodnight. And you cannot reconcile with her until she gets married again. Faizan says, can you tell me about the proper procedure and distribution of Qurbani? Well, the time of Qurbani is over, but as you might know by now, there isn't anything prescribed by the Prophet ﷺ. The only thing that is found is the saying and the opinion of Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Abbas, and Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, may Allah be pleased with them all. These 3 companions used to say that the Udhiyah, or as known in Urdu, Qurbani, the Udhiyah is the Islamic name, so we should stick to it. The Udhiyah is divided into 3 portions. One is to be given to the poor as charity. The second is to be given to relatives, neighbors, and loved ones as a gift, no matter who you want to give it to. Even if you give it to non-Muslims, there's no problem. And the third, you should eat from that. But if you mix these portions and they're not equal, so you give half of it for charity and you eat the second half, no problem. If you give a little bit in charity and call your relatives on the rest, no problem. If you give it all to charity and eat this little bit, no problem, inshallah. But to do the third is what the companions used to say and recommend. Zayd says, can a woman give her fellow women in marriage as her wali? The answer is definitely not. This is not permissible. A wali or a guardian who has the authority to give another person in marriage must be a man, and he must be related in normal cases. In 99.9% cases, he must be the guardian of the woman, her father, if not then her grandfather paternal, if not then her son, if not then her brother, if not then her paternal cousin, if not then that is her paternal uncle, if not then her paternal cousin. If she doesn't have anyone, then the imam or the Muslim judge or the Muslim ruler would be her guardian. Romana says, can I do ruqya for curing diabetes? The answer is yes. Ruqya can be done for any illness, whether mental or physical, you are suffering from. We do that all the time. Whenever I get stomach ache or heartburn or sports injury, I do ruqya to it myself, alhamdulillah, and I find tremendous recovery through it, because this is a blessing from Allah Azza wa Jal that He gives every individual, every Muslim. Express your poverty, your humility, your need to Allah Azza wa Jal. Recite the Qur'an, drink Zamzam water if you have, do your dua, and inshallah you'll be as good as gold. Jihan says, spouse are destined for Allah. Is this hadith true? I always get this question and I wonder what is meant by it. So after some pondering, I think that a lot of the people try to comfort themselves when they say that a potential suitor came and left, and we regret that he or she rejected our proposal. So in order to comfort themselves, they say that spouses are destined and by Allah Azza wa Jal. So this was not meant to be, so it will not happen. Also, when a woman marries a man and he's abusive or he's not practicing, she goes to the elders and complains, seeking advice, seeking divorce, and they comfort her by saying, it's destined by Allah, you have to live with it. And this is not entirely true, in the sense that it should not be meant to accept mistakes and to live with these mistakes to the end of your life just because it was destined by Allah. No, Allah Azza wa Jal tells us to seek a cure and solve our problems. If I'm starving, if I'm hungry, this was destined by Allah. But also Allah Azza wa Jal has told me to go and look for food and eat. If a woman has an abusive husband, or someone who does not practice, or someone who oppresses her when it comes to religious practices, we don't tell her it's destined by Allah, keep your mouth shut and live like a slave. No. You have the right to file for divorce. You have the right to go to the police and complain about his physical abuse if you can back this up with evidences, medical reports, etc. You have the right to file for khula if he's not suitable for you and to your family and to your children. So yes, marriage is destined by Allah. Your spouse is destined by Allah. But so is your divorce, so is dying, so is illnesses, so is everything that happens in this world. Nothing happens without it being destined by Allah Azza wa Jal. Karima says, 1. So many Muslim men travel abroad and marry to Christian or atheist women having contract. He pays her some money to be able to get residency, maybe for passport. but actually she lives her life with a boyfriend. And so what Islam says about this is totally prohibited, and it is cheating and lying. A real man doesn't do this. A real man gets into marriage, whether to a Christian woman or to a Muslim woman, for the sake of marrying her. And yes, we do not have what the Christians have, till death do us apart, but we believe that marriage in Islam is to stay. So when I marry a woman, it is not something that is timed, and that after 3 or 4 years I'll divorce her and leave when I finish my scholarship and I get my degree. No, this is not in Islam. It's not in Islam to use my marriage to get a green card or citizenship or permanent stay in that country. This is not manly. This is not Islamic. And cheating and lying to the authorities like this is prohibited. Having someone registered as your wife at the side of Allah, yet having boyfriends and living her filthy life like this while she's your wife, this is a clear indication that you are a dayyuth. And the Prophet said, ﷺ, 3 types of people will not enter paradise. Among them is the dayyuth. So the companion said, "O Prophet Allah, what is a dayyuth?" He said, dayyuth is a man who approves sins and filth to his wife. So if a man is married and he allows his wife to have a boyfriend or to chit-chat with men and go out with them, and he has no jealousy, he has no shame, he doesn't feel that this is wrong, his wife is dancing with his best friend, or his wife is having a meal and laughing and her head off with his neighbor, and it's all cool, I trust her. This is a dayyuth, and he will not be admitted to Jannah. May Allah protect us all. And the second question for Karima: if a man conditions to establish marriage to his fiancée is to have a certain job in a certain country, or else no marriage, can we consider this as a conditional marriage? Is it permissible in Islam? This is not a condition, because as stated before here or somewhere else, I don't know, a man does not stipulate conditions, because he has the authority to divorce whenever he doesn't like something. It's the other way around. It's the woman who stipulates conditions before the marriage contract, saying that I stipulate the condition that you never stop me from working, or you never prevent me from pursuing my degree. And she has the right to ask for that, and he has the right to refuse. And if he refuses, there's no marriage. If he accepts, then he has to abide by this condition, because if he does not fulfill it in 3-4 years time, she has the right to call for a divorce. It does not give him anything, and she leaves him, she dumps him. But for the man to make it as a condition that his wife works in a certain country, this again is not a real man. He falls under the same category of the dayyuth we spoke about earlier, and Allah knows best. Thirdly, if someone proposed to marry a Muslimah, both are in a foreign country and her family approved it, is it okay in Islam to call or introduce her as a friend, not as a fiancé? Now this is a little bit overboard. They're not allowed to communicate to begin with, and they're not allowed to chit-chat or date or go for a coffee or to have a meal together just because her family approved their engagement. He's a total non-mahram to her. And all the time they're spending and all the chit-chats they're having, these are sins compiling over them, over their shoulders, and they have to pay for it. And by the way, a lot of such engagements end in breaking up. So yes, he does talk to her family and they say, yes, we approve the engagement, but the marriage did not take place. They consider themselves fiancés and they date, they go out, and sometimes they even have intercourse because she trusts that he is her man. And after a year or two of engagement, they break up. Because this is what they see in the West. This is what's happening in America and Europe. Celebrities getting engaged for a year or two to their fiance, and you see The Rock, if you like it, put a ring around it. So he gets engaged to her. They live like man and wife. After 2 years, maybe she even conceives and gives birth to a kid or two. They're not married yet. And all of a sudden, a change of heart, a change of winds, and they break up. So the woman now is not even divorced, but she was consumed and used and thrown like a bone to the dogs. Islam does not allow or permit this. Islam protects both the man and women. If they want halal engagement, they know the procedure and they have to get married, and Allah knows best. He says, if a person is dead and you want to do a qurbani for them or an udhiyah, is it permissible? If yes, should the person taking the qurbani take for him as well, or can directly take qurbani for the dead one? Udhiyah is due upon the living. In my own sacrifice, in my own ram, I include my wife and children and all dependents living under my roof. I also include my dead father, my dead grandmother, my dead mother-in-law, etc. in the same sacrifice without any problem. But if I have a deceased father and before he died, he said, son, you see my wealth? I have allocated a building for charity. So this is on rent, and people pay rent every year, and we give the rent to charity. This is called waqf, endowment. He says, every year I'd like you to slaughter an udhiyah for me and give it to the poor. So then I have to fulfill his will. If he did not leave money behind and he ordered me to do it from my own wealth, this is up to me. I'm not obliged to obey it because this is not an obligation, it's a request. So I can simply sacrifice my own udhiyah and include him in it. But if I have wealth and I'd like to fulfill his wish, I can have two udhiyah, two sacrifices. Now, if I understand the question truly, I've answered it. If I did not understand it correctly, maybe he now was asking about if I offer a sacrifice on behalf of the dead, do I divide it into 3 types? Eat one type, give one type, and donate for charity one third, one portion? Or because it is on behalf of deceased, I have to give it all? It's an issue of dispute. The Hanbali school of thought they say that, yes, I'm representing the deceased and I have to do with it as if he was alive, and divide into three portions as we've stated earlier, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. Zinat says, for the last 27 years after the father had died and mother died 17 years ago, but sometimes some of the siblings don't understand and are holding the property for themselves, neither dividing and neither selling. So what Islam says regarding these siblings who do not want to sell inheritance property, what is the ruling and punishment for not distributing the inheritance and property? This is sinful. They have no right in withholding it like this against the other heirs' will. If I share with other siblings a property, I demand that they give me my portion of it in cash. If they refuse to sell, then they must buy my portion and give me my cash. And if they refuse this as well, then they are transgressors, because they're depriving me from having my own God-given share. So the easiest thing is to go and file a case against them in court, and the court would force them either to sell and distribute the money, or to buy those who want cash according to the prices of today. And unfortunately, I've seen so many similar cases, and millions of dollars were wasted because the siblings are too soft. Take them to courts and no, he's our brother, he's our elder, we don't want to shame him. He's a thief. What do you mean by you don't want to shame him? If you don't want the money for yourself, care about your children, because if you die today, definitely your children will have no right in calling for it, no evidences. But now while you're alive, it's haram throwing your wealth down the drain like this. Adi Gobison, Allah, I don't know. Abdullah Adesola, who are those people entitled to the heirs? I don't understand the question. If you're talking about who are the heirs of a deceased, well, we went through this in the chapter that dealt with inheritance, and we said that there are types of heirs that have a percentage, like the wife, the husband, the mother, the daughters or daughter, etc. They have a percentage of a quarter, half, an eighth, a sixth, 2/3, 1/3, etc. And there are those who inherit through virtue of kinship. They don't have a percentage, such as the son, such as others. So it depends upon the fact that who died and who did he leave behind, and then we can understand this, inshallah. Number 20, and we conclude with this question, inshallah. Lyric Shala says, if Eid is prayed in the mosque instead of open place, there is a musalla, should we attend it, or would it be an innovation to pray in a mosque because the Prophet ﷺ prayed Eid in musalla? Please clarify. This is an issue of dispute. If there is a musalla, you have to go and pray in the open area. But if you are in a city where they do not allow people to pray in open areas, and they confine them to pray in masjids only, in this case, you should pray in the masjid and not disable this great ritual that Islam has brought, and Allah Azza wa Jal knows best. This is what happened here in Saudi Arabia this last Eid. We were prevented from praying in open musalla so that the social distancing can be implemented. And all the prayers were prayed inside the masjid. We didn't like it, but we had to comply with the instruction, with the orders, and we prayed the Eid within the masjid. May Allah Azza wa Jal make us steadfast on Islam and return the blessing and favor of Allah upon us, where we used to pray shoulder to shoulder, foot to foot in masjids without any delay or fear. هذا والله أعلم ونسبة العلم إليه أسلم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.